Okay. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to 1440 Multiversity. My name is Scott Kriens, one of the founders of Multiversity, and I'm here with Dan Siegel, Dr. Dan Siegel.
Hi.
Dan, thanks for being here.
Scott, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you.
As with you, my friend. For those of you that may not know, Dan is preeminent, is the best word for it. He's an interpersonal neurobiologist and MD out of UCLA, also a now long-term meditator and dear friend of so many names we all know, Jack Kornfield, John Kabat-Zinn,
Scott Kriens,
Scott,
and Joni Kriens.
John O'Donohue, when he was with us, just a long lineage of time spent in the science, the neuroscience, and the deep practice of not the brain, but the mind. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. So I will do more listening than talking because I love listening when you talk. So.
There might be a lot of silence because I like listening to you.
Well, thank you for being here, my friend.
It's great to be here.
It's a treat.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on the opening of 1440 Multiversity.
We are excited, made possible by people like yourself being here. So, and in fact, here this weekend.
Yes.
For Mindsight in Leadership. I know you guys are teaching bringing emotional intelligence into the workplace.
Caroline Welch and I are teaching that this weekend, and it's to be the second time we're teaching a workshop here at 1440.
That's right. And leading up to a conference, an education conference we'll talk about coming up in January also. But
the Art and Science Connection is going to be a fabulous gathering of educators talking about the science and practice of what does it mean to teach about emotional intelligence, social intelligence, mindfulness, and really this mindsight idea that you can really promote a sense of our interconnectivity and an awareness so kids can help the world really thrive.
And I love this, and we're going to talk about mindsight and in that conference, for example, how it manifests into ultimately what we're out for is student success.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about all that, but emotional intelligence in the workplace.
Yeah.
And what you and Caroline will be teaching this weekend. Tell us a little bit about that and the origins of the work and the thesis of the beliefs behind.
Yeah, well, Caroline brings a long history in the workplace, working in different professional environments as an attorney and also different companies. I come more from the science and clinical side, and then together we look at how this thing called mindsight is something that promotes insight into yourself, empathy to understand other people, and then integration, which is really how you honor differences and promote linkages. So leadership that demonstrates mindsight is demonstrating social intelligence for understanding others, emotional intelligence for understanding yourself, and then the capacity to say, how do we bring a diverse group of people together, like you do here at 1440, to say everyone has different skill set, people bring different intelligences, different tendencies, different passions, and how do we honor all those different approaches, but then bring them together and link them so that in the linkage, things don't lose their differentiated nature. So it's more like a fruit salad rather than a smoothie. You're not blending everybody together. Integration is this third part of mindsight. So when you run a company or an organization or community, country, a world with a mindsight approach, it's saying there's a lot of room for diverse points of view. And how do we actually get underneath the behavior and see the mind beneath that behavior, whether you're a parent raising a kid or a teacher helping children and teens grow, or you're someone running a company. So that's what we're going to teach this weekend.
And I love it. And one of the things that you pry open so beautifully is this difference between the brain and the mind.
Yeah.
And this brain is, I know what you call the neural firings that are going on inside of one head.
Yes.
And the mind and the flow of energy as you define it. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well,
this is a subject of great love on development on your part, and I'd love hearing about it.
It is. And I think the first time that Joni and you and I met was around this issue of what is the mind. I remember meeting out in that porch in the East Coast, and the idea that whether you're someone trying to promote social intelligence in schools, or emotional intelligence in schools, or even mindfulness, there's a larger frame where you say, well, what is the mind that's being cultivated there? So since the time of Hippocrates, 2,500 years ago, people in medicine have said, oh, the mind is just the brain. But actually, the mind, your feelings and thoughts and attitudes, behaviors, your memories, your hopes, your dreams, your intentions, those are all mental processes that are shaped as much by what happens in your head as the whole body. So the first thing to say is that Hippocrates may have been wrong to limit it to just what's in the skull.
Yep.
So that's the first statement, that it's embodied not just in skull. But then, if you think about it, when something is happening with someone you love, it affects the way you think and the way you feel and the way you have hopes and dreams, and affects the way your perceptions are. And that's because relationships are just as much a part of the mind as what happens as if you got hit in the head or got drunk or something, right? That affects the brain directly. So
that's what I feel right now.
Yeah.
That's that energy between. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the betweenness, you know. And so you say, well, what's one thing that could be both inside your head? So we'll grant that neuroscience is really important. Hippocrates was on to something smart.
Something's going on in there.
But there's also, so it's not in place of that, right? Something also. So if you have one mind, let's assume that for a moment, with many aspects to it, but one mind, how can one thing be both seemingly in two places at once, within the head and also between you, let alone also in your body? And then the answer comes up is just what you said. Energy flow is not limited by the skull, nor is it limited by the skin. So when you really look deeply at energy, you know, mind becomes really something that is not defined by skull or skin. And then you go, okay, well, let's at least put a location for its two sides, like a coin has a heads and a tail. You don't say it's two coins, it's one coin. Mind has a side that is inner, for sure, but it's not limited to the head. Because you have a brain around your heart and a brain around your intestines, actually. Neural networks that process energy flow as information. But then there's stuff that happens that's called extended cognition. It's embedded in our culture. And we can look at that as the inter part. So you have an inter side of your mind and an inner side of your mind. One mind, these two sides, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So then you go, well, it's energy and information flow. When you think about 1440, what you're trying to do here, because you and I have known each other a long time, the vision in Joni's eyes and your eyes and in your hearts that comprise your mind was, how can you bring the 1440 notion, this deep gratitude for each minute of the day, you know? And then you say, well, how can we actually bring this into the world of programs you supported through your foundation? And then you say, well, my gosh, what if we had a center, not just of learning this or that, but that had as its principle the idea that bringing this integrated mind into the world is how to make the world a better place.
And what I love about, and one of the things that's been so great about getting to know you as well as we have over the years, is you have such a great way of turning this, what runs through my head as sort of a hope or a dream, into like a real thing.
Mm. Yeah.
You know, and there's really something going on. This energy flow is not just some abstract notion.
Yeah. Well, exactly.
And you know, I remember once hearing about these brains we have.
Mm-hmm.
You know, intellect carries messages to the brain, empathy from literally nerve centers
in the heart
region.
Yeah.
Instinct from the gut.
Yeah.
Courage from the brains in the spine.
Yeah.
Traveling through us all.
And it all gets put together. Yeah.
And then, and this is where I want to get to the inter part, because you know it must be sometimes that'd be frustrating sometimes, and someone says, "Well, I don't believe in that," and to me it seems like, well, have you ever seen a dead person and a live person, one next to the other? Do you think there's no energy difference between the two?
Yeah,
I mean, it's the thing. It's the thing that makes us alive, right? And then how is it possible that it's bounded somehow in this weird lead-lined container inside of our skulls or even our bodies? So, I mean, to one way of thinking about it, it's obviously shared.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's the layperson's understanding of it. And you've spent so much time with the subject. How how do you deal with skeptics that just, or just maybe just to call it more fairly said, call them the uninformed?
Yeah.
What's the simplest way of conveying this thing that we feel that people can't name?
Yeah. What a beautiful question. What a beautiful way to ask it. You know, we grow up in families where people will tell you, you know, oh, you're little Scotty, I'm little Danny, you know, they'll name you, right? Right, like that. And then you get to school and maybe they start teaching you about, you know, the brain is where you come from and you think your mind is from the brain, or they say yourself is only in your skin. Mm-hmm. So in modern culture, in terms of how you approach people, you're calling them uninformed, but in some ways, they are too informed.
Over-informed. With the wrong information.
Exactly. Exactly.
I like that. That's a great way of putting it.
So then, you know, if you begin to wake up from these statements of the mind just being synonym for the brain in the head, or the self being encased by your skin, if you wake up from that and go, well, hold on a second, just like you're beautifully describing, you know, then you start, if you want to look at it as an analogy, you start realizing people, let's say people are like candles, and those statements that limit the mind to the head or the self to the body, mm-hmm. what they are is they're saying that the total identity of a candle is the wax, and they don't mm-hmm. look at the flame.
I like that.
Right? But instead, if you look at the energy part of the candle, you got this wick and all this light is coming. Well, if
going everywhere.
Yeah. And if my wick isn't lit and yours is, in modern culture, it would go something like this. Scott, your life is all about you being the brightest candle of the bunch, you know. That's what you want to do. And if you see other candles lit up, blow them out, right? And then you see me, you go, oh, poor Danny, you know. He's just, but that's okay, because look how bright I am. But instead, if you realize you're the flame and you're the light, then you look at my wick unlit, you lean over, you light me, right? Then there's another candle over there, you light them up, and you realize it takes nothing away, right? You got that? And so when that happens, what did it do to the world?
One light at a time.
And it made it brighter, right?
Yeah.
One light at a time. So this is the kind of world we need to create when you realize the flame creates shared light. That's the inter. Mm-hmm. And that's energy. I mean, flame is just literally energy. And the light that's created is photons, right? So it's literally not trying to be metaphysical about it. It is physics.
Right.
When you talk about energy, and once you get into the physics of energy, suddenly the nature of consciousness and mental processes becomes clear in a whole new way. I just sent you last night the last part of the new book, but it has this deeply going beyond the mind stuff you're reading. And the thing that's so fun about that is then once we do that, then you realize, let's say a place like 1440, is how do we light up each other's wicks, right, and make this a brighter world?
And in the invitation to do so, bring people to it that may not have given this much thought.
Yeah.
But create this really smooth on-ramp. That's the thing that's frustrating sometimes, isn't it? Is you don't have to climb a mountaintop to do this. It's not rocket science in one sense. I know not to take anything away from the neuroscience that it actually
or
is.
The rocket scientists, yeah.
or rocket scientists. Yeah. But the experiencing of it doesn't require the neuroscience to be intellectualized, right? It's felt.
Exactly,
right?
it's felt.
It's real.
Right.
You can point to it. You can feel it.
Well, this is the beautiful thing, I think, when I met you and Joni, is we were talking about that. How do you actually bring this to classrooms? Right. For Caroline Welch and I, when we teach together, that's the idea we're going to do this weekend, is how do you give people direct experience? Now, she's been meditating for a long, long time, much longer than I have. So I came at it kind of a little bit skeptical. I'm kind of a science person. And then the experience also changed me. So I got won over the idea that you can practice a way of focusing attention, opening awareness, and developing kind intention, those three things. That research shows it's going to integrate your brain, it's going to raise your immune system's functioning, it's going to improve the way you prevent inflammatory illnesses from happening, it's going to actually change the enzyme telomerase that repairs the end chromosome, it's even improve your heart functioning. These are all now research-proven findings. So as a scientist, you know, when I say, and also a clinician, hey, a mind-sight approach to, let's say, having a company, it's good for your body, it's good for your mind, in terms of regulating your emotions and thinking clearly and focusing attention. And it's good for your relationships because it increases compassion and empathy and decreases implicit biases like racial biases. So the idea that you can, this is the amazing thing about those studies, you can show the part of the brain called the default mode, that when it's excessively differentiated in the brain, it's associated with a lot of separate self-preoccupation. And fear,
yeah.
and anxiety, and sometimes meaninglessness. So you're separate. It's like I'm only the wax of the candle. I'm only like, oh my God, this is a terrible life, right? That's it. That's like an overly separated, differentiated, and isolated default mode. Now, what the research shows on the brain side of things, if you do those three things, which are part of what's called mindfulness practice, develop focused attention, open awareness, kind intention, and compassion. Those three things. Mm-hmm. It actually gets the default mode to be more integrated with the whole brain. And when you do studies of open compassion and open awareness, having kind regard for everyone, not just people who are like you or people who are your friends or people in your family, but this open compassion, the brain is at its most integrated. And other studies show an integrated brain is a brain that goes along with well-being. So what we have here is a win-win thing. You get a place like 1440 that came from your heart and your head and every aspect of your being, the two of you. And you turn this into this gorgeous place with the forest and the unbelievable love that you put into these buildings. And then people can go from the city life and the contemporary view where they're just the wax. They have these different opportunities for reflection, for classes. In our course, for example, they're going to get direct experiential immersion as well as the science. And then they start realizing there's more to life than just being the wax. I'm also the flame. And then I get a hit off of your life because you're lit up. It's empathic joy, right?
It is, and I didn't mention this earlier. For those of you noticing this backdrop behind us, we're in the sanctuary here, which is sort of the heart and soul. And we didn't pick it by accident. And this conversation hits it perfectly. The layperson's belief behind all of this work at 1440 is what we say, as you've heard me say many times, is our vision is compassionate communities. And compassion is a natural resident phenomenon. My compassion for you is no different than for self, because in the intermind and in this shared energy, it is a shared self, right?
Totally. Exactly.
We all have compassion looking out for our own selves.
Exactly.
But you are my own self.
Exactly.
Right? And the beauty of this, to me, and the work that you're doing is in not just a spiritual conversation about that, but the science of it, and then the link to the practice.
Yeah.
And this is where I want to ask you to talk a little bit about, I think it was in around 2005, I believe, when you ran into John Kabat-Zinn.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
Here you are, this practicing neuroscientist, MD, deep into the functions of the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala and what's going on in here. And then you run into this guy.
Yes.
And I know Jack followed shortly after. And
that's right.
And so now, I guess what I want to ask you to pick up to help people that might be crossing that bridge for the first time. You're deep into what's going on in the brain, and then you encounter mindfulness. And the practice, right? And what was the marrying of the two like? How did it land on you when you saw it for the first time?
Yeah. Wow. Well, the brief intro to that moment when I met John Kabat-Zinn and also Jack Kornfield was I was looking at the brain just like you're saying, and how attachment relationships seem to create a brain that was more integrated. So a person could have more inner regulation of emotion and thought and stuff like that. And my daughter's preschool director, Mary Hartz, and I wrote a book where we just wanted a word to mean be conscientious as a parent. So we just said, be mindful. And that book, which came out in 2003, was then used for workshops. And parents reading the book would say, when are you going to teach us to meditate? And I was already doing things that for the academic world were really weird, like saying attachment shapes your brain and stuff like that. And the mind was not just the brain. So I was like a little worried that people would think I was going to teach them to do something strange, like meditate or something like that. So I said, what do you mean? And they point to the word mindfulness. And then I said, what is that? And they go, well, it's a form of meditation, you know? And I didn't realize that that was actually an entire field for about 2,600 years. And so like excluded, my mind was from
medical
that.
school could do that.
Exactly. Not happy about that, but that's just the way it was. And then soon after that, I was asked to be put on this panel, as you're pointing out, John Kabat-Zinn. So I read his 2 books at the time and 2 papers that were hardly anything in the early noughts then. And so I read them, and what was strange for me as a scientist was that the field I was trained to do research in was attachment, child relationship to parent. And we had uncovered in my field certain findings that have what's called secure attachment. And then I read Richie Davidson and John Kabat-Zinn's findings, and that John also put in his books. And they were identical. And I was going, this is strange, because as far as I can read, this mindfulness stuff is like a solo job. You sit on a cushion, or you're doing yoga, or whatever it is, but it's kind of private. Whereas I'm studying relationships and attachment. So when I was on the panel with John, I said, I don't know anything about mindfulness, but here are these functions that we found, and actually, it looks like you found them, but they also overlap with when the prefrontal region especially is integrating the whole system. And he goes, Dan, you can relax. That's exactly what we found, but you don't know anything about meditation, so go meditate. That's when he invited me to do this week-long silent retreat for the first time, is when I meditated. I wouldn't suggest it as a first step, but so you can, so as a scientist, I learned.
The best first step, maybe.
Or maybe. So that's where I got into it, and I was really struck by basically my experience of being introduced to mindfulness meditation that way. It was an internal attunement where I had to develop a kind of presence within my own awareness for whatever was happening. And what I had studied as an attachment researcher was called interpersonal attunement, where you, let's say you're my kid, I need to focus on the mind beneath your behavior. And if I do that, I have the most likelihood of you developing secure attachment. And if I don't do that, you may get various forms of non-secure attachment. So what I said to John, and what I still feel to this day, is that the energy and information flow that we see in loving relationships that are compassionate, respectful, for secure attachment, are tuning in to the energy and information patterns of one person by another. It's called interpersonal attunement. So it's a form of integration, because your inner subjective life and mine may be different, but I'm going to link to it. And then what happens with mindfulness is you develop focused attention, open awareness, and kind intention, where what you're doing is you're developing an internal kind of integration. So even like the field of compassion, I would prefer, instead of calling it self-compassion, I would prefer it be called inner compassion. So that instead of calling it self-compassion versus other-directed compassion, you start doing self versus other. It's exactly what you beautifully said a moment ago. What we want to do is say, yes, I have an inner mind. I can be compassionate in my inner mind. I have an inner mind where this being here is part of myself.
I love that.
Right?
And this whole concept of integration, that you talk about it wonderfully, integrating the left side of my brain to the right side of my brain, integrating my mind to my body, integrating you with me, arriving at this, uber integration, the real understanding what it actually means, right?
Including right here.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Powerful stuff.
Very powerful. And that's the amazing thing about the empirical findings. The beautiful uber integration you're talking about has been shown to happen with mindfulness training. And it is impaired when you have the opposite of secure attachment, which is trauma.
The contrast. Yeah. And I want to make sure too we touch on this as it relates to the conferences coming up and how it manages its way into education.
Yeah.
So I know this weekend, as you talk about emotional intelligence, really, one of the reasons we call this place Multiversity, as you know, is it's multiple doors into the same room. Right?
Yeah.
So it's all the same stuff.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And so in the work you'll do this weekend, bringing emotional intelligence into the workplace to create the secure attachment to allow the kind of growth that makes companies successful. Now in January comes the education conference, and one of the ways they speak about it in education is you're trying to create the classroom that's high challenge, low threat, right? So that I'm stimulated by the challenge, but I'm secure and not threatened by quote unquote success or failure. Really another way of saying, I think, and I'm going to ask you to talk about this, but these factors of integration and of bringing the self and selves together to create this attachment, direct translation into capabilities, capacity building, experiential learning, and growth and development of our kids in the classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, the title of the conference, The Art and Science of Connection, really illuminates a number of the things you're beautifully saying right here. And from the educator's side, it would be something like this. If you look at the studies that compare what are called prescriptive relationships to what we call developmental relationships, then a prescriptive relationship is, if I'm your teacher and you're my student, I have the curriculum all set up. I'm going to just throw it at you. You have your homework,
here, I'm down here.
And it doesn't actually matter what your mental experience is in terms of your feelings, your thoughts, or what it means to you is irrelevant. I have this prescriptive curriculum I'm going to get through, and you're not going to get in my way of my getting through it. And that, unfortunately, is what a lot of teachers are pressured to do, but also taught how to do. So in the art and science of connection, connection is just the opposite of that. It's like we have skills and knowledge you need to learn, but you're going to be a participant in the learning process so that this is a developmental relationship, which means you're a part of this communication. It's a connection, not just a dumping. And, maybe you can, I think it was Dewey who said, education is more like lighting a fire than filling a pail. I think it was Dewey who said that, but somebody who said that.
I like that.
And that's the lighting your fire business of the flame we can refer to. Again, what students really need is a developmental relationship that's a connection. You as a teacher can learn the art and science of that connection. What a child carries with them is what Maya Angelou said. People won't remember necessarily what you said or what you did. They're going to remember how you made them feel. And if they feel felt by the teacher, probably the most important emotional experience anybody can have on this planet, feeling felt. Then they are curious and they create what we would call, Tina Bryce and I would call a yes brain. A yes brain is what turns on the social engagement system. It says, I'm ready to learn. I get a growth mindset in terms of Carol Dweck's work. I get this grit in terms of Angela Duckworth's work. And this yes brain approach is what I'll be talking about there. You can show how a teacher or a parent can approach the same interaction, creating a yes brain in their child so they have the grit and resilience and growth mindset, which allows them to hold on to curiosity, develop resilience, and go on and light other people's flames as well.
It's so amazing too, because it's so universal. What it reminds me of is something that I know you have written about that was told to you by a mentor of yours in medical school. So here we are in the world of medicine outside of education, but the comment feels exactly the same, which is you can't care for people until you care about them.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
John Whitfield,
And so here you're being taught that, you're supposed to care for the patients and it's illness you're dealing with and it's sickness and all that. And he comes along and says, you've got to care about them first. And really, how is that any different than the teacher who needs to care about the child before they can care for their education? It's
right. And
the same.
And that art and science connection of caring like that, we got to make sure that educators have the tools, the mindset tools, so that they don't get burnt out. They maintain their own well-being. They can have their own resilience. And once you learn those skills, then you can have those connections. If you don't, if you over-identify and you don't have self-care processes that you know about, these are mindset skills of insight, that would allow you to really soothe your own distress. Then it'll be a trouble. So caring for, so you can care about, all these ways that you can do that are supported by developing these skills that we're going to talk about at the Art and Science of Connection.
Yep. Well, my friend, I care about you.
And me for you.
I love you being here. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
So much.
Great to be here. I love being here too.
Thanks for being with us, everybody. We'll see you at 1440 soon.